The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city streets as Maria Rodriguez eased her car through the familiar route home. At 8 months pregnant, every drive felt like a small adventure, but today she was especially tired after her final prenatal appointment. Her doctor had just confirmed everything was perfect with her baby girl, and Maria couldn't help but smile as she thought about the tiny heartbeat she'd heard on the ultrasound. As a civil rights attorney who'd spent the last 7 years fighting for community justice, Maria was used to long days at the office. But lately, her thoughts had shifted to the nursery waiting at home, walls painted a soft mint green, a rocking chair by the window, and a handmade blanket from her grandmother draped over the crib. Her husband had insisted on assembling all the furniture himself, something that had led to more than a few amusing weekend adventures with missing screws and backwards chair legs. The evening traffic was lighter than usual, and Maria found herself mentally reviewing her to-do list before the baby arrived. There were still thank you cards to write for the baby shower gifts, hospital bags to pack, and one last case she needed to hand over to her colleague. After nearly a decade of representing families affected by systemic injustice, she knew the importance of leaving her cases in capable hands during her maternity leave. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, probably another suggestion for the baby's middle name. Their family had turned it into a friendly competition, with everyone from her youngest cousin to her great-aunt throwing names into the mix. Maria chuckled, remembering her mother's latest suggestion, naming the baby after all 4 of her great-grandmothers. The playlist she'd created for the baby filled the car with soft jazz, a mix of classics her father had played during her own childhood. Research showed babies could hear music in the womb, and Maria loved the idea of her daughter already experiencing family traditions. She hummed along to Ella Fitzgerald, one hand resting gently on her belly where the baby had started her usual evening dance routine. Passing the community center where she'd started her career as a fresh-faced lawyer, Maria reflected on how much had changed in her neighborhood. New businesses had opened, community programs had expanded, and slowly but surely, positive changes were taking root. She played her part in many of those changes, representing families who needed a voice, organizing community meetings, and building bridges between residents and local authorities. The setting sun glinted off her rearview mirror, and Maria adjusted it slightly, catching a glimpse of the baby car seat already installed in the back. Her best friend, a pediatric nurse, had helped her secure it properly last weekend, though it had taken them nearly an hour and a YouTube video to figure out all the straps and clips. The sight of it made everything feel more real. In just a few weeks, she'd have a tiny passenger back there. The familiar streets of her route home felt different these days, as if she was seeing everything through the eyes of her future daughter. The park where she hoped to push a stroller, the library where she imagined future storytime sessions, the ice cream shop where she'd create new family memories, it all seemed to glow with possibility. Traffic slowed at a construction zone, and Maria used the moment to check her phone properly. 3 messages from her mom, all about baby names, 1 from her husband, he'd remembered to pick up more prenatal vitamins, and an email about an upcoming community meeting she'd helped organize. Even on maternity leave, she planned to stay connected to the causes she cared about, though everyone kept telling her she'd be too busy with midnight feedings to think about anything else. Lost in thoughts about the future, Maria almost missed the flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat as she noticed the police cruiser behind her, signals flashing. Years of experience representing clients in similar situations kicked in, and she took a deep breath, carefully signaling to pull over to the side of the road. As she reached for her license and registration, she had no way of knowing that the next few minutes would change not just her life, but her entire community. As Maria pulled her car to the curb, she mentally reviewed the procedure she'd advised her clients about countless times: keep your hands visible, move slowly, and remain calm. The police cruiser's lights painted the inside of her car in alternating flashes of red and blue. She could see the officer in her side mirror, taking his time to approach her vehicle. "Stay calm, little one," she whispered, feeling her baby shift restlessly. The dash clock showed 6:45 p.m. Her husband would be wondering why she wasn't home yet. Her phone lay silent on the passenger seat, screen up, ready to record if needed. Years of representing clients in similar situations had taught her the importance of documentation. Officer Barrett appeared at her window, his face set in a stern expression that made Maria's heart beat faster. She noticed he'd already unclipped his holster, a detail that her legal training flagged as concerning for a routine traffic stop. Still, she kept her voice steady as she greeted him. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why you pulled me over?" The response came sharp and quick. "License and registration." No explanation, no greeting in return. Maria's legal mind started cataloging every detail, even as she carefully reached for her documents. "Of course, officer. I'm reaching for my purse to get my license." She narrated her movements, another habit she'd developed through years of legal work. The leather bag sat by her feet, and reaching for it with her pregnant belly wasn't easy. "I said license and registration." Barrett's voice rose, his hand now resting on his weapon. "Get out of the car." Maria's throat tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Officer, I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm happy to comply, but I need to move carefully. I have my documents right here." She held up her wallet, movements deliberately slow. But Officer Barrett wasn't listening. He yanked the door handle, making Maria flinch. "Out. Now." "Sir, please, I'm complying with your orders, but I need a moment." "Could you please call a supervisor?" Maria started recording on her phone, keeping it partially hidden while focusing on staying calm. Her baby kicked hard, responding to her rising stress levels. "I'm not asking again." Barrett's face had reddened, his voice echoing off the surrounding buildings. A few pedestrians had stopped to watch, phones raised. Maria could see them in her mirrors, silent witnesses to the escalating situation. "Officer, I'm a lawyer and I know my rights. Please tell me why you've pulled me over." She tried to keep her voice steady, professional, though her hands had started to shake. "I'm happy to cooperate, but as you can see, I'm heavily pregnant and need to move carefully." Barrett reached into the car, his hand closing around Maria's arm. The grip was tight enough to make her gasp. Refusing to comply with an officer's orders. "You lawyers think you're above the law." Through her rising fear, Maria noticed more phones recording now. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, their presence both reassuring and concerning. She knew from experience how quickly these situations could spiral out of control. "Please don't pull on me, officer. My baby." Maria's voice cracked slightly as she tried to protect her belly while Barrett attempted to force her from the car. Her seatbelt was still fastened, the strap stretched across her pregnant belly, serving as a final line of defense. The evening sun had almost set now, casting long shadows across the scene. Traffic crawled past, some drivers slowing to stare. Maria could hear murmurs from the growing crowd, could see more phones being raised to record. But it was the approaching footsteps she didn't see. Footsteps that would change everything about this encounter, that mattered most. Her baby kicked again, hard, as if sensing the tension. Maria kept one hand protectively over her belly while trying to maintain her composure. Everything her years of legal experience had taught her told her this situation was dangerously close to a tipping point. What she didn't know was that someone with the power to help was about to step in, someone whose presence would transform this frightening encounter into a catalyst for change. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as Officer Barrett continued his aggressive stance. Maria's heart pounded, but she drew on years of courtroom experience to keep her voice steady. Her phone was still recording, capturing every second of the escalating situation. Through her fear, she noticed how Barrett's body camera seemed to be turned off, another detail that sent warning signals through her mind. "I'll say it one last time. Get out of this vehicle." Barrett's face was inches from the window now. The veins in his neck stood out as he shouted, spittle hitting the glass. Maria could smell the coffee on his breath, see the way his hands trembled with barely controlled anger. "Officer, please." Maria tried again, her voice catching. "I'm 34 weeks pregnant. Let me show you my medical card." She moved carefully, reaching for her purse where her hospital documents were stored. The baby kicked again, harder this time, making her wince. Barrett didn't wait. He yanked the door handle so hard the entire car shook. "You people always think you have special rights." His words carried clearly in the evening air, making several onlookers gasp. More phones rose to record the scene, their screens glinting in the fading daylight. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, her nurse's scrubs still on from her hospital shift. "Officer, please, she's clearly pregnant. This isn't safe." But Barrett waved her back with a threatening gesture, his other hand still gripping Maria's door. Maria's training kicked in, and she started documenting out loud. "Officer Barrett, badge number 4721, is attempting to forcibly remove a visibly pregnant woman from her vehicle without stating the reason for the traffic stop. The time is 6:52 p.m., and multiple witnesses are present." Her voice shook slightly, but she kept going, knowing how crucial these details could be later. The baby moved again, pressing against her ribs. Maria tried to shift to a more comfortable position, but Barrett mistook her movement for resistance. He reached in through the half-open window, his fingers grasping at her arm. Maria pulled back instinctively, protecting her belly. "Stop resisting." Barrett's shout echoed off the surrounding buildings. He fumbled with his radio, calling for backup. "Got an uncooperative subject, possibly armed." The last words made Maria's blood run cold. She knew how situations could turn deadly when officers claimed they suspected weapons. The crowd had grown larger now, their collective presence both reassuring and worrying. Some people were shouting at Barrett to stop, while others were calling 911, reporting an officer's excessive force against a pregnant woman. The sound of distant sirens added to the chaos. "Please," Maria said, her lawyer's composure finally cracking. "My baby, you're going to hurt my baby." She could feel her blood pressure rising, remembering her doctor's warnings about stress during pregnancy. The memory of her morning appointment, just hours ago, when everything had been perfect, seemed like a lifetime away. Barrett's radio crackled with a response about backup units en route. He smiled grimly, clearly thinking he'd soon have support. But he didn't notice the tall figure approaching from behind, didn't see the phone recording every moment of his actions, didn't realize that his career was about to change forever. The evening traffic had slowed to a crawl as drivers stopped to watch. The sun had dipped below the buildings, casting long shadows across the scene. Maria's phone continued recording, its memory filling with evidence that would soon be seen by millions. Her baby kicked again, as if protesting the injustice of the situation. Through her fear, Maria noticed a change in the crowd's energy. People were pointing behind Barrett, their expressions shifting from concern to relief. Someone important was approaching, someone whose presence would transform this frightening encounter into a moment of accountability. The next few seconds would change everything, though neither Maria nor Officer Barrett knew it yet. The crowd fell silent as a distinguished-looking man in a charcoal gray suit stepped forward, his phone held steady as he recorded the scene. Judge Robert Chen had been driving home from the courthouse when he spotted the confrontation. With 30 years of judicial experience, he knew immediately that something was very wrong with this traffic stop. From his position at the red light, he'd watched the entire scene unfold. He'd seen Barrett's aggressive approach, heard his shouting, and witnessed his attempt to forcibly remove a clearly pregnant woman from her vehicle. As a federal judge who'd presided over numerous civil rights cases, he recognized a clear violation of protocol when he saw one. While recording with one hand, Judge Chen had already made 3 crucial phone calls. The first was to the police department's Internal Affairs Division, the second to the State Attorney General's office, and the third to the police chief, a former law clerk of his. Years on the bench had taught him the importance of proper documentation and immediate action. "Officer Barrett." Chen's voice carried the authority of decades in the courtroom. "I am Federal Judge Robert Chen of the District Court, and I'm ordering you to step away from this vehicle immediately." Barrett's head snapped around, his hand still gripping Maria's car door. The change in his expression would have been almost comical if the situation weren't so serious. The color drained from his face as he recognized one of the most respected judges in the state. "Your Honor, Barrett's voice trailed off as he realized the gravity of his situation. His hand dropped from the door as if it had suddenly turned hot. "I have witnessed and recorded your entire interaction with this citizen," Judge Chen continued, his voice steady but stern. "I've already contacted Internal Affairs, and they're on their way. Step back from the vehicle now." Maria let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her baby kicked again, but this time it felt more like a celebration than a protest. The crowd around them had grown even larger, their phones still recording every moment. "Your Honor," Maria managed to say, her legal training kicking in even through her relief. "I'm Maria Rodriguez, an attorney with the Civil Rights Law Center." She could see Barrett's face fall even further at this revelation. Judge Chen nodded, keeping his phone trained on Barrett while approaching Maria's car. "Mrs. Rodriguez, are you and your baby all right? Do you need medical attention?" His tone had softened, showing genuine concern. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder. But these weren't the backup units Barrett had called for. 3 unmarked cars pulled up, and plainclothes officers from Internal Affairs stepped out. Judge Chen had made sure the right people would respond to this situation. The evening had grown darker, but dozens of phone lights illuminated the scene like tiny spotlights. Someone in the crowd started a live stream, ensuring that what happened next would be witnessed by thousands. The young nurse who had tried to intervene earlier stepped forward again, offering to check Maria's blood pressure and make sure she was okay. Barrett stood frozen, watching as his routine traffic stop transformed into what would become a career-defining moment, though not in the way he'd planned. His body camera, which he'd conveniently forgotten to turn on, would later become a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. Judge Chen remained by Maria's car, his presence a shield of legal authority that transformed the entire atmosphere of the scene. He'd seen countless cases of police misconduct from his bench, but witnessing it firsthand, especially against a pregnant woman, had stirred something deep in his sense of justice. The crowd's nervous energy had shifted to one of relief and satisfaction. Justice wasn't just a concept in a courtroom today. It had arrived wearing a charcoal gray suit, carrying a phone, and armed with the authority to make real change happen. And this was only the beginning of how this incident would transform their community. The arrival of Internal Affairs changed everything. 2 senior officers, Lieutenant Rivera and Captain Wam, took immediate control of the scene. They'd worked with Judge Chen before and knew his reputation for fairness and attention to detail. The judge's presence had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a masterclass in proper police procedure. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we have paramedics on the way," Lieutenant Rivera said, her voice carrying both authority and compassion. She shot a disapproving look at Barrett, who now stood off to the side, looking significantly smaller without his previous bravado. The young nurse from the crowd was already checking Maria's blood pressure using equipment from her work bag. "Your blood pressure is quite elevated," the nurse, who introduced herself as Grace, said quietly. "Let's focus on getting you calm and comfortable." She stayed by Maria's side, her presence reassuring and professional. Captain Wam was already collecting witness statements and phone numbers from the crowd. Every person who had recorded the incident was eager to share their footage. The livestream that someone had started was now trending locally, with comments and shares multiplying by the minute. "Your Honor," Maria said, her legal mind still working despite her physical discomfort, "I'd like to formally request all radio communications and dispatch records from this incident be preserved." Judge Chen nodded approvingly. Even in distress, she was thinking like the skilled attorney she was. The paramedics arrived in their ambulance, lights flashing but sirens silent now. They'd brought out their equipment, including a fetal heart monitor. The crowd parted respectfully to let them through, many still recording but maintaining a considerate distance. "Baby's heartbeat is strong," announced the paramedic after a few moments with the monitor. "But we'd like to take you to the hospital for observation, just to be safe." Maria agreed, thinking of her doctor's warnings about stress during pregnancy. Her phone buzzed. Her husband had seen the livestream and was already on his way to the hospital. Officer Barrett was being interviewed by Internal Affairs near their unmarked car. His demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the aggressive stance, replaced by nervous glances and fumbling explanations. His supervisor had arrived and was reading him his rights while placing him on immediate administrative leave. "We'll need your statement when you're feeling up to it," Captain Wam told Maria gently. "But your health comes first. We can do this at the hospital once you've been checked out." She handed Maria her card, which bore her direct number and email. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but those who remained were sharing their contact information with the investigators. A local community organizer had arrived and was carefully documenting everything, knowing this incident could lead to meaningful changes in police training and accountability. Judge Chen spoke quietly with the Internal Affairs officers, describing what he'd witnessed. His presence had not only stopped the situation from escalating, but would also ensure that proper procedures were followed in the investigation. His reputation for fairness meant that both the police department and city officials would take this incident seriously. As the paramedics helped Maria onto the stretcher, she couldn't help but think about all her clients who had faced similar situations without a judge present to intervene. Her baby kicked again, and she made a silent promise that this incident would lead to real change. The evening had fully settled in now, the scene illuminated by emergency lights and the glow of phone screens. News vans were starting to arrive, their reporters gathering at the edges of the scene. This story would be on every local channel by nightfall, but more importantly, it would become a catalyst for reform. Grace, the nurse, offered to ride in the ambulance with Maria. "I'm off shift anyway," she said with a kind smile. "And I'd feel better knowing you have someone with medical training by your side." It was a small gesture of humanity that brought tears to Maria's eyes, a reminder that even in difficult moments, there were always people willing to help. The emergency room buzzed with activity as Maria lay on the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around her. Her husband Carlos held her hand tight, his work tie still loose around his neck. He'd rushed straight from his teaching job after seeing the viral video. The baby's heartbeat echoed reassuringly through the monitor, strong and regular. "Your blood pressure is starting to stabilize," Dr. Patel said, reviewing the charts. "But I want to keep you here for observation overnight." She glanced at the small crowd gathered outside the private room. 2 internal affairs officers, Judge Chen, and Grace, the nurse who'd helped at the scene. All of them had stayed, turning this hospital room into an impromptu command center for justice. Lieutenant Rivera stepped in quietly, notepad ready. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I know you're tired, but we need to document everything while it's fresh. Are you feeling up to giving your statement?" She pulled up a chair, her manner gentle but professional. Maria nodded, one hand resting protectively on her belly. She recounted everything: the initial stop, Barrett's aggressive behavior, his refusal to explain why he'd pulled her over. Carlos's grip tightened as she described Barrett trying to force her from the car. "We've already collected 23 videos from witnesses," Lieutenant Rivera said, making notes. "The livestream has over 100,000 views now. The police chief is holding an emergency press conference in an hour." She paused, looking up from her notebook. Officer Barrett's body camera was off, but his dash cam was running. The footage confirms everything. Outside the room, phones kept buzzing as news of the incident spread. Community leaders were calling for immediate action. The hospital's PR team was politely keeping reporters at bay, protecting Maria's privacy while she recovered. Judge Chen spoke with Carlos in the corner, explaining the legal proceedings that would follow. "This isn't going away," he assured them. "I'd already spoken with the district attorney. They're taking this very seriously." His presence had transformed a potential tragedy into a moment for real change. Grace popped her head in during her break. She'd returned to her regular shift, but kept checking on Maria. "The baby's heart rate is perfect," she reported with a smile. "She's a strong little one." The word strong echoed in Maria's mind. Her daughter was already teaching her about resilience. Lieutenant Rivera's phone buzzed with updates. Barrett's personnel file had been pulled, revealing previous complaints that had been buried or dismissed. His supervisor was also under investigation for failing to address earlier red flags. The investigation was expanding beyond just one officer's actions. "The community's rallying behind you," Carlos told Maria, showing her his phone. Local organizations were planning a peaceful gathering outside the police station. Her clients, families she'd represented in civil rights cases, were speaking to reporters, sharing their own stories. Her experience was giving voice to countless others. Dr. Patel returned with more test results. "Everything looks good, but please try to rest," she advised. "Your body needs to recover from the stress." She adjusted the room's lighting, creating a calmer atmosphere despite the activity outside. Through the window, Maria could see the sunset had given way to city lights. The same streets where she faced discrimination hours ago were now filling with supporters. Social media was flooding with messages of solidarity. What started as a frightening traffic stop was becoming a movement for change. Lieutenant Rivera finished taking statements and stood to leave. "We'll need you to come in for a formal interview once you're released, but there's no rush. Your health comes first. She handed Maria her card. Call me directly if you think of anything else. As the evening settled into night, the hospital room gradually emptied of officials. Carlos arranged pillows behind Maria's back while she watched the police chief's press conference on the room's small TV. The chief announced Barrett's suspension and a full departmental review, his words careful but clear about the seriousness of the situation. Maria felt her baby move again and smiled for the first time since the incident. You're going to be born into a world that's changing, she whispered. Through the window, she could see people gathering with candles, their lights twinkling in the darkness, a community coming together, demanding better, supporting one of their own. The emergency room buzzed with activity as Maria lay on the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around her. Her husband Carlos held her hand tight, his work tie still loose around his neck. He'd rushed straight from his teaching job after seeing the viral video. The baby's heartbeat echoed reassuringly through the monitor, strong and regular. Your blood pressure is starting to stabilize, Dr. Patel said, reviewing the charts. But I want to keep you here for observation overnight. She glanced at the small crowd gathered outside the private room. 2 internal affairs officers, Judge Chen, and Grace, the nurse who'd helped at the scene. All of them had stayed, turning this hospital room into an impromptu command center for justice. Lieutenant Rivera stepped in quietly, notepad ready. Mrs. Rodriguez, I know you're tired, but we need to document everything while it's fresh. Are you feeling up to giving your statement? She pulled up a chair, her manner gentle but professional. Maria nodded, one hand resting protectively on her belly. She recounted everything: the initial stop, Barrett's aggressive behavior, his refusal to explain why he'd pulled her over. Carlos's grip tightened as she described Barrett trying to force her from the car. We've already collected 23 videos from witnesses, Lieutenant Rivera said, making notes. The livestream has over 100,000 views now. The police chief is holding an emergency press conference in an hour. She paused, looking up from her notebook. Officer Barrett's body camera was off, but his dash cam was running. The footage confirms everything. Outside the room, phones kept buzzing as news of the incident spread. Community leaders were calling for immediate action. The hospital's PR team was politely keeping reporters at bay, protecting Maria's privacy while she recovered. Judge Chen spoke with Carlos in the corner, explaining the legal proceedings that would follow. This isn't going away, he assured them. I'd already spoken with the district attorney. They're taking this very seriously. His presence had transformed a potential tragedy into a moment for real change. Grace popped her head in during her break. She'd returned to her regular shift, but kept checking on Maria. The baby's heart rate is perfect, she reported with a smile. She's a strong little one. The word strong echoed in Maria's mind. Her daughter was already teaching her about resilience. Lieutenant Rivera's phone buzzed with updates. Barrett's personnel file had been pulled, revealing previous complaints that had been buried or dismissed. His supervisor was also under investigation for failing to address earlier red flags. The investigation was expanding beyond just one officer's actions. The community's rallying behind you, Carlos told Maria, showing her his phone. Local organizations were planning a peaceful gathering outside the police station. Her clients, families she'd represented in civil rights cases, were speaking to reporters, sharing their own stories. Her experience was giving voice to countless others. Dr. Patel returned with more test results. Everything looks good, but please try to rest, she advised. Your body needs to recover from the stress. She adjusted the room's lighting, creating a calmer atmosphere despite the activity outside. Through the window, Maria could see the sunset had given way to city lights. The same streets where she faced discrimination hours ago were now filling with supporters. Social media was flooding with messages of solidarity. What started as a frightening traffic stop was becoming a movement for change. Lieutenant Rivera finished taking statements and stood to leave. We'll need you to come in for a formal interview once you're released, but there's no rush. Your health comes first. She handed Maria her card. Call me directly if you think of anything else. As the evening settled into night, the hospital room gradually emptied of officials. Carlos arranged pillows behind Maria's back while she watched the police chief's press conference on the room's small TV. The chief announced Barrett's suspension and a full departmental review, his words careful but clear about the seriousness of the situation. Maria felt her baby move again and smiled for the first time since the incident. "You're going to be born into a world that's changing," she whispered. Through the window, she could see people gathering with candles, their lights twinkling in the darkness, a community coming together, demanding better, supporting one of their own. The city council chamber was packed to capacity. 3 weeks after the incident, Maria stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the crowded room. Despite her advanced pregnancy, she had insisted on testifying in person. Her husband, Carlos, sat in the front row, ready to support her if needed. "What happened to me isn't unique," she began, her hands resting on the podium. "What's unique is that a federal judge witnessed it. How many other mothers haven't had someone there to protect them?" The room fell silent, dozens of phones recording her testimony. The proposed Community Protection Act lay before the council members. Its pages represented weeks of work by legal experts, community leaders, and police reform advocates. Lieutenant Rivera sat nearby, ready to present the findings of her investigation. "Our investigation revealed 47 similar incidents in the past year alone," Rivera explained to the council. "Most complaints were dismissed without proper review." She gestured to the stack of files beside her, each one representing someone who hadn't had a judge present to intervene. Grace, still wearing her nurse's scrubs after her hospital shift, waited to testify about the medical risks of police confrontations during pregnancy. Other healthcare workers had joined her, forming a coalition to advocate for better police training in dealing with pregnant women. Outside the chamber, hundreds gathered peacefully. They held signs supporting the new legislation, their presence a reminder of how one incident had united the community. Local businesses had closed early so their employees could attend, showing solidarity. The police chief took his turn at the podium, looking notably different from his first press conference. "We've already implemented changes," he announced. "Every officer now undergoes enhanced training. Body cameras are mandatory and checked hourly. But we need this legislation to make these changes permanent." Judge Chen watched from his seat, noting how the incident had sparked genuine reform efforts. His presence had transformed one traffic stop into a movement, but it was the community's response that would create lasting change. Barrett's former supervisor faced questions about ignored complaints. His answers were telling. A culture of covering up misconduct had evolved over years. But now, with public attention focused on the department, that culture was crumbling. Maria's legal colleagues presented data from across the state showing patterns of similar incidents. Their research had expanded beyond one department, revealing a need for statewide reform. Other cities were already requesting copies of the proposed legislation. The community speakers offered powerful testimony. A teacher described how her students feared police encounters. A grandfather shared his worry for his pregnant daughter. A retired officer spoke about the need for better training. Each story added weight to the need for change. Social media coverage continued to spread. The hashtag #ProtectAllMothers trended nationwide. Other states began examining their own police procedures. What started as one frightening traffic stop was becoming a blueprint for national reform. Local organizations had formed a coalition to monitor the implementation of new policies. They would ensure the changes weren't just on paper, but practiced in reality. The community was committed to long-term oversight. As the hearing continued into evening, Maria felt her baby move. She smiled, thinking how different things would be when her daughter was born. The changes they were fighting for would protect not just her child, but all children in their community. The sunset painted the council chamber windows in soft orange light. People outside had lit candles, their flames a symbolic reminder of hope and change. The community had come together not just to protest wrongdoing, but to build something better. Carlos squeezed Maria's hand as she returned to her seat. "You did great," he whispered. The baby kicked, as if adding her agreement. This was about more than justice for one incident. It was about creating a safer future for everyone's children. 6 months had passed since that fateful evening. The hospital hallway filled with the sound of a newborn's first cry as Maria held her daughter for the first time. Carlos wiped tears from his eyes while Grace, who had become a close friend, checked the baby's vital signs. "She's perfect," Grace announced, wrapping the tiny girl in a soft blanket. Outside the window, the morning sun painted the sky in shades of hope. This same hospital where Maria had been monitored after her traumatic traffic stop was now the scene of pure joy. The Community Protection Act, now widely known as the Rodriguez Act, had passed with overwhelming support. Its effects were already visible throughout the city. New police training programs emphasized de-escalation and sensitivity. Body camera compliance had reached 100%. Complaint investigations were thorough and transparent. Officer Barrett had been terminated after a full investigation. More importantly, the system that had protected officers like him was transformed. The police department had new leadership, including Lieutenant Rivera's promotion to Deputy Chief of Professional Standards. Judge Chen visited the hospital that afternoon, carrying a small teddy bear and big news. 5 more states have adopted versions of the Rodriguez Act, he told Maria. Your experience is creating change across the country. The judge had become a vocal advocate for police reform, speaking at conferences nationwide. The community had changed too. Regular meetings between police and residents built trust. Officers attended community events, getting to know the people they served. The us versus them mentality was slowly being replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Maria's law firm had created a special division focused on policy reform, helping other cities implement similar changes. Her daughter's birth certificate shared a date with the signing of another state's version of the Rodriguez Act, a coincidence that felt meaningful. Grace had started a program training medical professionals to advocate for patients during police encounters. Her quick thinking that day had inspired others to step forward when needed. The hospital where she worked now had clear protocols for handling similar situations. Local schools included units on civic engagement and community relations in their curriculum. Carlos, still teaching high school, proudly shared how his students understood their rights and responsibilities better than ever before. The spot where Maria had been pulled over was transformed too. The community had turned it into a small garden, a symbol of growth and change. Flowers bloomed where fear had once taken root. As Maria prepared to leave the hospital, familiar faces stopped by. Lieutenant Rivera, now Deputy Chief, brought a department onesie with Future Changemaker printed on it. The young officer who'd replaced Barrett in that precinct came to show how things were different now. Maria's daughter gripped her finger with surprising strength as they got ready to head home. "You've already changed the world, little one," she whispered. The baby's peaceful face showed no awareness of her role in transforming a community, but her future would be different because of it. The news crews that gathered outside the hospital weren't there to cover controversy this time. They came to document hope, a story of how one incident had sparked real change. Maria and Carlos smiled at the cameras, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her car seat. As they drove home, Maria noticed a police car at an intersection. The officer smiled and waved, his body camera clearly visible. No fear clutched at her heart this time, just appreciation for how far they'd come. Their house had changed too. The nursery, once just a symbol of future hope, now held their daughter. The walls were still that soft mint green, but now they also displayed framed copies of the Rodriguez Act and photos of community celebrations. "Welcome home, baby girl," Maria said as they crossed the threshold. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the start of a new chapter. Their daughter would grow up in a community that had learned, changed, and grown stronger together.